following is an original production of Radio Sydney. Welcome to a multimedia production of Peninsula Affairs, a current affairs show produced by Radio Sydney. Any opinions expressed are solely those of the show's host Peter Wainwright and Radio Sydney. The feasibility of redevelopment of Beacon Avenue, Sidney BC. Residents and visitors alike will value the charm and character of Sydney's Main Street downtown. Not unlike many smaller towns in Canada, our downtown is looking a little older. Many feel our downtown needs support and revitalization. Some argue that we need to make Beacon Avenue two-way again or develop a theme for buildings in the downtown. Others argue we need to invest in economic development to attract and retain businesses. There is a diversity of opinions about what should be done. Let's have a critical look at our downtown. We all know that many of the buildings on Beacon Avenue are old. Several date back to before World War II. So what are the ages of the buildings on Beacon Avenue? First, let's get oriented. This is a map of Beacon Avenue. This is Beacon Avenue and 5th across the street from Save On Foods. And here's the traffic circle at the bottom. 17 of the buildings predate Canada's first building code. Indeed, there has been no redevelopment since 2001, with the exception of the 2 lots now vacant and the building Radio Sydney now inhabits. 10 of 37 buildings predate World War II. 17 of these buildings predate Canada's first building code, which was introduced in 1960. Here are the oldest buildings on Beacon. Sidney Bakery is the oldest, built in 1924. Here's another way to look at the data. Buildings older than 1980 represent better than 75% of Beacon Avenue structures. Some buildings have had renovations or improvements to their facades. The BC Assessment Authority data provide an estimate of effective age of buildings. Note, the vast majority of buildings have an effective age of older than 1980. Notice that Sidney Bakery doesn't appear to have changed much. Why should we care? Because older buildings generally don't use non-combustible materials and aren't constructed to limit the spread of fire or built to modern seismic standards. Older buildings are less energy efficient and contribute more GHG emissions than modern construction. There are some compelling reasons why it is important to see upgrading or redevelopment of these older buildings. Despite favorable economic climate and a receptive council, most of the development in the past 4 years has been on the side streets, not on Beacon Avenue. Why hasn't there been more development on Beacon Avenue? Redevelopment or major renovations require that buildings comply with current building code and bylaws, which can be very expensive. There is a trade-off between the revenue from what they can build versus the cost of redevelopment or improvement. So what's limiting economic feasibility? Parking requirements. Compliance with parking requirements or payment in lieu of $10,000 per space can be a barrier. If vehicle access is only possible via Beacon Avenue, this means a minimum drive aisle width of 18 feet or 5.5 meters. This isn't practical for lots with small frontage. It can be a challenge for lots that don't have access other than from Beacon. Vehicles must not be required to back onto the street. Construction access is also a factor. Here are the parcels where there is no access except from Beacon. These will be some of the most challenging to develop. Zoning. Developments on side streets are allowed to build more floor area than on Beacon. Also, lot sizes on side streets are generally larger, creating land use efficiencies. Side streets provide more of an opportunity for developers. 4 lots on Beacon are smaller than the required minimum lot size. That'd be 250 meters square or 2,691 square feet. These are grandfathered and can be developed, but only if the plans otherwise conform to all zoning requirements. It's no wonder most of the development approved by the previous council was not on Beacon Avenue. The point is, it will be an economic challenge to assemble parcels to make something big enough to make redevelopment practical. Ownership. There are 32 unique owners of these 37 downtown parcels. 22 of these 37 are less than 5,000 square feet. There are very few parcels with a single owner owning adjacent land. The redevelopment of much of the downtown area will require assembling the land from several different owners. Look at these lots, all in one block. On their own, they're too small for redevelopment to be feasible and are all individually owned. capital gains. Many owners have held their properties for a long time, during which land values have increased significantly. Unless redevelopment is done by the property owner and all units are rentals, redevelopment can mean a significant capital gain, resulting in taxes.
Oh no!
This represents the least economic value for the owner because the rate of return is lower. Plus, if the space is currently leased, you would lose rental income while the building will be under construction. So what are the economics for a typical 100 by 48 foot lot on Beacon? Let's crunch some numbers. The zoning bylaw talks about the amount of square footage you are allowed to build. That's controlled by the floor area ratio, or FAR. FAR is the ratio of the size of the building to the lot size. The zoning bylaw also requires you to have ground floor commercial. You also need to have common space for access to upper floors and equipment. In practice, that means about 18% of floor area could be common space. Keep this number in mind, as it will become important when we look at the selling price of the building. The upper floors could be residential or commercial, but residential will probably generate a higher return on investment. For residential, you need hall and access to the elevator. You'll likely need at least 10% as common space. By the way, the zoning bylaw requires you have a number of family size units, and they are not allowed to be penthouse. Also, every unit needs a window, so this is a problem when you have a zero lot line. Now we know what we can build. The question becomes, how much will it cost to buy a piece of land and have it ready to build on? The first three rows are bookends. The average of assessed land values from the BC Assessment Authority for these properties is about $166 per square foot. The sale of the town's old fire hall is the record for an amount paid for land at $433 a square foot. For the estimate of $299, we pick the average of the high and low. If we take this average price and multiply it by the lot size of 4,800 square feet, we get the land cost. Of course, this is not vacant land. They all have a building on them and are most likely to be rented. So you'd have to buy the building as well as the land. Using BC assessment numbers, the average value would be over $666,000. By the way, the low end was about $150,000 and the high end was over $2 million. This does not include property transfer tax, legal and closing costs, demolition, permit fee, and cost of demolition. This also assumes there are no extra costs such as remediation. Thus, the ready-to-build land cost would be just over $2.2 million. Now we have to estimate the cost to build a new building. As we said, the land cost was just over $2.2 million. Remember that floor area ratio? Well, that makes 11,000 square feet the maximum size building you can build on a 48 by 100 foot lot without paying bonus density. A typical construction cost of a new building in Sydney is about $240 a square foot. That means construction cost will be about $2.6 million. Now, add municipal fees including development permit fees, building permit fees, parking in lieu fees, and DCCs. Design costs are next, and this gets you everything you need to satisfy the permitting requirement. Design costs typically run about 9% of the land costs. On top of this, you have project management costs of about 3%. We conservatively estimate a 5% cost to finance. Let's assume this financing is for 18 months, covering 75% of the land purchase and construction costs. Projects are rarely built within this time frame, so this is an optimistic number. Voila! Now we have a project cost number of $5.7 million. Now that we have the building, what can we sell it for? Note, selling the building gets us a return faster than leasing it. Previously, we said the building would have 3,936 square feet of commercial space, which typically sells for $430 a square foot, so the sale price of the commercial space should be about $1.7 million or so. What's the fair market value for residential condos, you ask? The current average sale price per square foot is about $740 for condos, which means prices of between $600,000 and $815,000 for an 800 or 1,100 square foot condo respectively. So, for a floor area of 6,394 square feet times $740 a square foot, you get a residential value of over $4.7 million. Now add sales commissions and marketing, you get the net value for the project to be $6.1 million for the base fare. What's the bottom line? We now have costs to build a building, including the land cost at $5.7 million. If we now build in a target at 8% profit, why else would any developer do this? By the way, 8% is very low given how risky such ventures typically are. We calculated at what price the building could be sold. Remember that $6.1 million? At the base fare, the developer won't make their profit target. And at the max fare, the project would net just over $500,000. This assumes no contingency, which could reasonably be 10% or about $600,000. The project is pretty marginal. No wonder development has favored side streets. Redevelopment doesn't seem likely, so now what? What does this mean for achieving the vision that is reflected in our OCP? Do we wait until the economy is more favorable for redevelopment? Do we wait until buildings are condemned or an owner dies and the estate needs to sell? Do we change what is allowed to make redevelopment more feasible? Do we offer incentives for redevelopment? Do we care if redevelopment doesn't happen? Well, development normally pays for streetscape improvements. Without redevelopment, streetscape improvements most likely would be funded by property taxes. Should we be encouraging building upgrades instead of redevelopment? If so, how? This presentation is not advocating any particular action. The objective is a better informed community. This has been a presentation of Radio Sydney. Data and analysis by Peter Wainwright, technical presentation by Bill Collins. Radio Sydney is the operating arm of the Sydney Arts and Media Society. We are a not-for-profit and always looking for help funding our programs. Please consider donating, which can be done by going to www.radiosydney.ca and click on the Give button at the top center of the homepage. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time. This has been a program of Radio Sydney.